What's going on, Imperials? Pokemon games bring new surprises every generation, some good and some bad. We'll be taking a look at the bad in my list of the worst new abilities in Sun and Moon. Number 6. Generation 1 and 2 Pokemon that received updated abilities. Some Pokemon were blessed when given new abilities, others were not. As of right now, the only Pokemon from the first two generations that have updated abilities are the legendary beasts from Johto and Gengar of all people. It might sound cool that these fan favorites are getting some attention until you realize that every one of these alterations is a downgrade. Gengar previously had the ability Levitate, which made sense because it was a floating ghost just like its pre-evolutions. More than that, being a poison type, Levitate offered complete immunity to one of its weaknesses. Its new ability, Cursed Body, is marginally useful at best, only with a small chance of disabling the last move used against you. Apparently, getting rid of immunities is something they intentionally sought after, because each of the legendary beasts has been stripped of the immunity that they once had to their own type. Granted, these were their hidden abilities, but if you did manage to get your hands on one, you'd have an even more impressive force of nature. Not that it really needed such a big improvement, but if I had one with its hidden ability and wanted to transfer it, it would seriously give me pause to think that it would become inferior just because it was moved to a new generation. I know that these changes were made in the name of balance, but could they really not just make other people better instead of forcing the best to be worse? Number 5. Battle Bond. My personal feelings about Greninja aside, it's a decent enough Pokemon to use in battle. It's become so popular that in the show, Ash and his Greninja grew to have such a close bond that they achieved a special battle form where Greninja would take on Ash's characteristics and motions. It was called Ash Greninja, and was designed to show how the strength between a Pokemon and a specific trainer can make them even more powerful. If, like me, you're wondering why Ash has this bond with Greninja and not Pikachu, you'll have to take that up with the showrunners. For whatever reason, out of all the things that have been created in the show, the game designers decided that this would be the one thing they needed in the games. Which might be cool, for your Pokemon to feel such a close bond with you that they start to look like you, and with character customization, you could finally put your personal touches on your Pokemon. Except that's not how it happens at all. Greninja still turns into Ash Greninja regardless of the trainer it's fighting with. That's right, your Greninja loves and respects you so much that it turned into its favorite TV character. Huh? If there were an Ash-based game, this might make sense, but it has no place here. In addition, it takes away one of the advantages that made Greninja so good in battle. If it has Battle Bond, then it can't be using the ability Protean, which is half the reason anyone would use a Greninja. As far as I can tell, all Battle Bond does is change the way it looks, boost its stats a little bit, and increases the power of the move Water Shuriken. Which means that you have to be using Water Shuriken in order to make the ability useful. If you pick this lesser ability, you'll also be stuck with a less powerful move option. Unless you want to double up on water coverage, or not utilize the ability to its potential, it's essentially handicapping yourself. The whole idea of inserting something like this into the game was rocky to begin with, but the poor execution created a disturbance so big that millions of voices cried out in excitement and were suddenly silenced by their disappointment. Number 4. Comatose. Immunity from status conditions sounds great, because it is. Water Veil keeps you from getting burned, Limber prevents paralysis. It's just always a relief to have one less thing to worry about. And Comatose protects Komala from status conditions because it's basically already asleep. Cool idea, huh? Well, maybe. Despite the protection it gives Komala, it's not able to take advantage of it much due to its mediocre stats and move pool. It's just not a top-tier threat, even with the immunity to statuses. Secondly, moves with effects based on sleep still affect this Pokemon. That means that Hex and Wake Up Slap do double damage all the time because it can never wake up. Hex isn't really a problem unless someone uses Foresight because of the Ghost immunity. But a fighting type move, which is super effective on Komala, always doing double damage is not really helpful in the ability department. Also, since Komala is essentially asleep, that means that Dream Eater can affect it at all times. You don't even have to waste a turn putting it to sleep because he's already done it for you. Just step up and enjoy the buffet, all while Komala's health is slowly sapped away. And if you were thinking of recovering that health, don't bother. Because it's already asleep, rest will fail anyway. In theory, this ability might have been interesting, but I think I would want my partner to take things just a bit more seriously and have enough respect to wake up. I mean, even Snorlax gets up every once in a while. Number 3. Steelworker. Steelworker is the unique ability of Dhelmise, a new shipwrecked-themed Pokémon. Steelworker boosts the power of Steel-type moves. That sounds great. Why is it on the list, you ask? Well, for one reason, Dhelmise only learns 5 Steel-type moves, and one of them is Metal Sound, which doesn't even do damage. Another 2 are Gyro Ball and Heavy Slam, where damage is completely dependent on outside variables. And another is Flash Cannon, meaning that you have to significantly beef up his special attack that's 40 points lower than his physical attack. This leaves his signature move, Anchor Shot, as your best and most predictable bet to hopefully be able to use this ability. Don't get me wrong, Anchor Shot is a pretty solid move, with it trapping the opponent from escaping, and especially with the power boost. But having an ability that only benefits one move is severely limiting and honestly disappointing. It feels like we talked about this before somewhere. Also, Dhelmise isn't even a Steel type. Why would they give Steelworker to a Pokemon that barely has enough attacks of that type to fill up all of its move slots? Maybe it would have been too powerful to get a 50% boost on top of the same type attack bonus, but they'll never know unless they try, and it's not like they've cared about balance before. This ability would work better on someone like Klinklang or Bisharp, or even Girder would make more sense. He's literally a Steelworker. It just seems like the concept behind this was unfinished somehow. Like they got halfway done, broke for lunch, and then forgot to finish after they got back. Hopefully in the future, Dhelmise will get access to an ability that matches it better, but as of right now, it has no choice but to be stuck with Steelworker. Face it, Dhelmise, you're sunk. Number 2. Surge Surfer. Raichu finally got some much needed love this generation. Unfortunately, its skills are situational at best. Alolan Raichu has the new ability Surge Surfer that doubles the Pokemon's speed when electric terrain is in effect. If that sounds a little odd, you're not alone. The most common method of activating electric terrain this generation is by sending Tapu Koko into battle, starting it immediately. That's about 100% more ways than people were interested in using electric terrain last generation. That's right, 3 out of the 4 terrain moves existed last generation, it's just nobody seemed to really care about them or try to use them at all. Though I'm not sure the best way to increase their viability is to saddle Raichu with a mediocre ability. To have the ability be useful, you'd either have to send in Tapu Koko and switch it right back out for Raichu, or have Raichu itself use electric terrain. Either way, you have to give up a turn you could otherwise be attacking. If you're in a double battle, then you could send them both out onto the field, but then you run the risk of being obliterated by a single Earthquake, since they're both electric types and share common weaknesses. I know it's essentially the same as Swift Swim or Chlorophyll, which have both been used to great effect. Ever since the turns of weather became numbered, it's been more reliable to set up with an agility or a speed boost, than to hope that the weather stays true to the forecast. Surge Surfer is good when it's in effect, but right now that's a pretty big if. Without electric terrain to spread those gnarly breakers, Raichu just has to stay beached. Bogus, man. Number 1. Old abilities with updated effects. Mega Evolution and X and Y were a huge threat. Many of their abilities were brand new and exclusive to these Megas, one of the most notable and infamous being Kangaskhan's ability, Parental Bond, which allowed the parent to attack, with the child attacking immediately after at half the power. Then there's things like Aerialate, Refrigerate, and Pixelate, which turn all normal type moves into flying, ice, and fairy type moves respectively, while boosting their power. Some regular Pokemon were massive threats because of their abilities too, one of the most formidable being Talonflame. The ability Gale Wings increases the priority of any flying type move. Couple this with Talonflame's already impressive speed stat, and you'll be outspeeding almost everything on the field. And Klefki was the bane of many for Prankster being such a nuisance to deal with. Many people were excited to carry over these Pokemon and continue using them to victory, if only that were the case. For whatever reason, Game Freak decided that these Pokemon were all too powerful. So what's the solution? We'll change what their abilities do! It's one thing to give an old Pokemon a new or different ability, but to take everything that was good about it and actively make it worse is not the way to go. Aerialate, Pixelate, and Refrigerate all received a 10% power drop, while Parental Bond got a 25% power drop. Prankster fails if used against a Dark type. Any Dark type. And worst of all is Gale Wings, which only works at 100% health. This means that the once priority move Roost is only guaranteed to go first when you're at full HP, at which point it won't do you any good. And if you use Brave Bird or Flare Blitz, two very common moves on Talonflame, you'll lose your priority altogether. How is that useful? The only one that could be considered an improvement is Weak Armor, which is a little known and even less used ability that when hit lowers your defenses and raises your speed. It's been changed so that the speed doubles, but with the defense drop, it's still not a good ability. I didn't like getting trampled by these powerhouses any more than the next person. But if you were worried about them being too powerful, that's probably something that you should have considered when you were first coming up with the concepts. If you notice an imbalance, it should inspire you to create new counters to these giant threats, not backpedal and try and undercut what made them so menacing in the first place. For all we know, these abilities are subject to change as well in the next generation. So everybody stay on your toes for when the ability Iron Fist only works with your right hand. Well, that does it for what I consider to be the worst abilities in Sun and Moon. What abilities are on your list? Were there any that you didn't know about? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to like this video, share it, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. We'll see you around next time.